Hi everyone. I wonder if you can. I wonder if you can see and hear me. Could you let me know? I can actually see the chat, which is good. Let me just see if I can share my slides too. How's that? I hope everybody can see and hear me. Do let me know via the chat, which I can see this time, which is good. Just readjusting my my thing. So yeah, so hopefully you will be able to see and hear me. Oh, hello, Amy, and hello everyone. Thank you so much. We see you. Can you hear me too? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I hope you. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, thank you very much, David. Thank you. Huzzah. Golly gosh. Thank you all for being here. And sorry yet again for the technical issues. YouTube, when you start the stream, it says going live, and then you just get this spinning wheel, and every time I've done it, it's at least taken a long time. When I say a long time, I mean like a minute, which is really disconcerting if you're used to things sort of being a bit snappier. And I had to reload the page this time, which worked, but all the same, YouTube continues to come up with various different ways to make me nervous and anxious and give me a breakdown. Anyway, thanks all for being here. If you're here, you are a Lapis member of the channel, provided I've set everything up right. In which case, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you signing up and sticking with me in this new way of doing lectures. So today we're going to be talking about the Egyptian labyrinth. Actually, we're going to be talking more generally about the Middle Kingdom and the Fayum, but the labyrinth is going to be the sort of centerpiece of the talk. We're going to do a sort of bit of history and then a bit of look at the development of the Fayum, and a look at one or two of the archaeological sites in the region, but particularly Hawara, which is where we can be pretty certain the labyrinth, which was famous in the late and Ptolemaic periods into the Roman period. We're going to be looking at Hawara in the most detail. And as with all the lectures in this series, this is the first time I've given this talk. I gave a sort of version of it to my group. I've just come back from the Fayum, as you may know. So some bits of this were sort of demoed, if you like, actually in the Fayum, which was nice. But this is the first time I've given this this talk as a kind of fully realized thing. So I'm sorry you're all guinea pigs every single time I give a talk in this YouTube series. I hope you don't mind, but it does mean that everything is new and fresh. And when I say fresh, I mean finished about sort of 15 minutes ago, because I'm forever doing things at the last minute, and that's because I've always wanted to say more, and I always think I haven't got enough material, and then I always overrun, and you know how it works. Anyway, so for anybody who's watching the recording, you're probably getting familiar with this by now, but I try and get online 10 minutes before the advertised start time of the talk. We're about 4 minutes away from that now. Perhaps I should have said that first of all, but anyway, you'll need to fast forward to about 10 minutes or just slightly less than that this time to get to the beginning of the talk itself. I wish I could time things better, but as I was saying just earlier, YouTube always seems to throw up some kind of glitch. Means I have to refresh my browser or whatever. Anyway, and I can see the chat this time, which I couldn't last time. Again, I'm really sorry about that. It meant I had no idea if anybody was even there, which now I think back to a month ago was really very disconcerting. I had a horrible feeling that I was doing my entire hour and a half talk with nobody there. So great to have you here. Lots of familiar names and faces. Hello, everyone. Hello, Martin. Hello, Leonardo. Thanks for coming. Hi, Jamie. Hello, Amy. Hi, Annette. Hi, Bettina. Hello, Intrepid Frady Cat in Texas. Probably a person rather than a cat. But anyway, hello. Hi, Marie. Hi, Tim. Hi, Anna. Hi, Zoe. Hi, David. Great to have you all here. Hello, Ellen. And hi, Jill as well. Hello, just down the road. Hi, Jill. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking with this series. Two more talks just to tell you about just before we get going. You've probably already seen the ad. I'm about to go back to Egypt on Monday. I'll be in Luxor for a week, looking at sites in and around ancient Thebes, and then I'll be in and around Abydos for a week as well. And during that trip, I am going to be taking a very close look at the Osirion. We've got special access to the interior of the Osirion, including the passageway, whether that's the entrance or kind of exit passageway, which I haven't been into since 2012. And I've never had a chance to really look at it properly, and never to photograph it properly either. So I'm really looking forward to that. And for that reason, because I'm getting all excited about Abydos and the Osirion, that's going to be the subject of my next talk. That one is coming up in at the beginning of November. Specifically, I should know this, shouldn't I? The 6th of November. And then the next one after that is slightly later in the month. It's the 19th of December. The reason being that I'm away again for the first couple of weeks of December. So 19th of December, little sort of extension to the Osirion theme. We're just going to be looking at the myth of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Seth. So looking forward to seeing you for those ones too. So we are at 6 o'clock by my reckoning, about 7 minutes into the stream. So there was a bit of a delay, wasn't there, at the start? I'm very sorry about that. Anyway, so I think I had better get going. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for signing up as channel members. I really, really appreciate it. I wouldn't be doing this stuff if it wasn't for you. As I mentioned, and as some of you may have picked up from social media, I'm just back from a week-long tour of sites in the Fayum. Not the first time I've been to the Fayum. I've been a few times before, but it's certainly the most detailed look I've had at the Fayum. I've never spent that long in the region before. We were staying at the sort of western extent of the lake Karun, Birkit Karun, which in ancient times was known as Lake Moeris. And there are a number of sites clustered around the edge of the lake. Most of them either Ptolemaic. We were going to places like Soknopaiou Nessos, which is known also as Dimeas Sabah, the road or of the lions or something like that. And we were at Tebtunis, El Baragat, Medinet Mahdi, which is Ptolemaic, but also there's an earlier Middle Kingdom chapel there. And in fact, most of the sites in the Fayum that survive to any great extent are either Ptolemaic or Middle Kingdom. And there's a good reason for that. It's at those periods that the kings of the country invested very heavily in sort of irrigation infrastructure. The Ptolemies, from either the time of Ptolemy I or more likely Ptolemy II, extended the network of irrigation canals in the region as an attempt to expand agricultural production there. And that led to an increase in settlements, temple building, that sort of thing. So that's left its mark in the archaeological landscape. and something very similar was happening earlier in the Middle Kingdom as well. So it's a region of particular interest for those two periods. So let us have a look at the historical background to the period. You'll probably have seen this chart before. I always think it's helpful just to start off by sort of orienting ourselves in the broad sweep of Egyptian history. So we're going to be in the Middle Kingdom for today, the second of the sort of great flourishings of Egyptian history as Egyptologists have it, in between the first and second intermediate periods. So it follows and precedes these intermediate periods during which the central authority, the authority of the king, collapses to some extent, and the country comes to be split, divided between rulers of sort of localized territory. And the Middle Kingdom broadly corresponds to the 11th and 12th dynasties of Manetho. They don't quite align. So the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, as we'll see, probably comes in about halfway through the 11th dynasty, actually. And depending on how and what you want to see as the sort of the point of collapse of central authority, the Middle Kingdom probably extends a little way into the 13th dynasty as well, but certainly by some way into the 13th dynasty. That line of kings, Manetho's 13th dynasty line, certainly was not any longer in control of the whole of the country. So that process of transition from a strong and stable centralized Egypt of the Middle Kingdom to a fragmented second intermediate period happens a few reigns into the 13th dynasty. We are mostly going to be concerned with the 12th dynasty here, which is a great a period of centralized rule. It's also a time of, as tends to be the way with these periods, of great monumental construction. It's a time of a resurgence in art as well, architecture, also literature. The classic phase of the Egyptian language, Middle Egyptian. That's the phase of Egyptian language that most people start off learning, and many of the best known literary texts in the Egyptian canon were written, or at least in the form they survive into this day, were written in the Middle Kingdom, mostly concentrating in this 12th dynasty period. So this is where we're going to be today. And these are the kings of the later 11th dynasty. Actually, this is not the entire 11th dynasty line. But the crucial king really of this period is Mentuhotep II, Amenemhat I. That was the second coronation name he took. It's during his reign that Egypt was reunified. So prior to a certain point in the reign of Mentuhotep II of Dynasty 11, country is fragmented. There's a military victory led by Mentuhotep, which leads to the reunification of the country, and thereafter the country is united. For our purposes today, we're going to be looking at Dynasty 12 down to the time of Amenemhat III, who's the builder of the pyramid at Hawara, and most probably the builder of the labyrinth, as well as being the builder of most of the great Middle Kingdom monuments in the Fayum region. So it's that sort of period, Mentuhotep II down to Amenemhat III, that we're particularly looking at. So you might know Mentuhotep from this statue, which, if I remember rightly, was discovered by Howard Carter when he was working in the area of the Deir el-Bahri temples, in a tomb which has come to be known as the Bab el-Hossan, the gate of the horse, or the door of the horse, which was just in front of the area of the Temple of Hatshepsut, and indeed the Temple of Mentuhotep. Here, found inside this tomb, a little way sort of in front of the temple, wrapped in linen. It's actually one of a number of statues of this kind of Mentuhotep which have been discovered in and around this area. Maybe just about the most kind of exciting find that was ever made while I was part of an archaeological project was a statue of this exact kind in Theban tomb number 37, which is a much later tomb, 25th dynasty tomb, chief steward of the god's wife of Amenemhat I. But that's one of those great assassination tombs. If you know my Kings in Thebes talk, you'll know these tombs a bit. They're cut into the desert plain, sort of off to the right. If you as you were sort of looking at this photograph, and they are cut down into the plain, and parts of those tombs left deliberately open to the light, so you can look sort of down into them, and indeed things sometimes fall down into them. And one of these statues of Mentuhotep, the causeway of Mentuhotep's temple cuts right through the assassination, and in fact the tomb of Hawara cuts through that causeway. So possibly one of those statues was along that causeway, maybe, or making its way away from the temple at some point, goodness only knows when, and it fell down into the courtyard, so-called, of the tomb of Hawara, and we found it upside down. The first thing we saw was the foot, and the feet of these Mentuhotep statues are they're very large, very big gaps in between the toes, very distinctive. So we knew sort of straight away, wow, we've got a statue of Mentuhotep. But this is the very famous one, and this is in the Egyptian Museum. His temple, by the way, the one I keep referring to at Deir el-Bahari, is not nearly as well known, of course, as the temple of Hatshepsut, but it's in fact it's much older, and it provided the inspiration for Hatshepsut's temple. If you think that Hatshepsut's architecture is a beautiful marriage of sort of built monument and natural landscape, well, she stole the idea from Mentuhotep. His temple, much less well known, but also doesn't look like nearly so much, particularly from the ground these days, mainly because it just hasn't been restored like the Hatshepsut temple. Anyway, you can see the Mentuhotep one just slightly in the foreground here in this photograph. His greatest achievement is this military victory over his rivals, the 10th dynasty line. One of the failings of Manetho in his history is that he didn't seem to realize that some of these kings whose names had been given to him by the priesthood in Heliopolis or in Memphis, or the names that he'd seen in temple archives, related to lines of kings that were contemporary with one another. These lines overlapped. Manetho's assumption is always that they followed one another. In actual fact, though, in these intermediate periods, you've got rival lines. So Mentuhotep's archenemies were the 10th dynasty line, who probably were the successors of the Memphite line, but who had moved southwards to Heracleopolis. That's the Greek name for the city. It was in earlier times known as Neni Nezut. It's in Beni Suef province, a little to the south of the entrance to the Fayum. So slightly further south, but a long way north of Thebes, which is where Mentuhotep and his 11th dynasty line were based. And here you see those two key sites. So this is how Egypt is divided in the first intermediate period, roughly north-south. That's where the division tends to be when you get these intermediate periods. So Thebes, of course, very well known, roughly corresponding to modern-day Luxor, just south of this great kink in the Nile, the Cana Bend. And Heracleopolis, as you can see, just slightly to the south of the Fayum entrance up there, and a little way south of Memphis, which is quite possibly where those kings originated. So Mentuhotep was succeeded by another couple of Mentuhoteps, third and fourth, who don't seem to have had quite such a great impact on things. They are then succeeded by Amenemhat I, who seems not to have been part of the royal line. It's not entirely clear how it came to be that the line passed from the 11th dynasty royal family to this non-royal individual. But it's possible that this Amenemhat was one and the same as the vizier under Mentuhotep IV, and it is sometimes suggested that he might even have been a usurper, and that this itself might have affected the way the 12th dynasty kings went about their business, because as we will see, they seem to have put in place a number of things to prevent their line from having been from getting shifted off the throne. So this is Amenemhat the first in a lovely relief. It's from Lisht, which is where he was buried. We'll have a look at where Lisht is in just a second. It's right at the sort of southern extent of the Memphis zone. This was part of a temple of his, which appears to have been demolished either during his reign or not very long afterwards, and it was recycled and used in another building of Amenemhat at the pyramid complex. But because it was reused and for the foundations of this building, it survived terribly well. So you get these lovely colours still preserved. This particular piece is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which under Dieter Arnold conducted very extensive excavations on this pyramid complex and that of his successor at Lisht as well. Amenemhat might have been assassinated. We can't be absolutely sure about this, but it's certain that, or it seems certain that he was attacked, and then there was an assassination attempt. It's not clear, and scholars are still arguing about whether or not this was successful. And this is our key piece of evidence. It comes from a text called the Instruction of Amenemhat, or sometimes the Instruction of Amenemhat for his son Senusret. The key passage reads, "It was after supper, night had come. I was taking an hour of rest, lying on my bed, for I was weary. As my heart began to follow sleep, weapons for my protection were turned against me, while I was like a snake of the desert. I awoke at the fighting, alert, and found it was a combat of the guard. Had I quickly seized weapons in my hand, I would have made the cowards retreat in haste, but no one is strong at night. No one can fight alone. No success is achieved without a helper." So it seems that he was asleep in the palace and was attacked by his own guards for some reason. "Thus bloodshed occurred while I was without you." You is his son and successor, Senusret, Sesostris. "Before the courtiers had heard I would hand over to you, before I had sat with you so as to advise you, for I had not prepared for it, had not expected it, had not foreseen the failings of the servants." So the argument is around whether or not this is Amenemhat having survived an assassination attempt, advising his son, hey, you better watch out, this is what can happen, or whether this is written as if from a message from Amenemhat after he has in fact been killed to his son by an imaginative scribe. But it's often taken as evidence that indeed he was in fact assassinated. In any case, it's during Amenemhat's reign that one or two key features of this period are introduced. One of them is the idea of the co-regency. There was possibly, and again, scholars of the Middle Kingdom are still arguing about this, a co-regency between Amenemhat and his son. So again, if you want to see that assassination attempt as being unsuccessful, then Amenemhat advises his son and subsequently invites him to become a co-regent. The idea, of course, of that is that if the king is then killed, then the son is already in place, and we get a sort of taste of that from this passage where he's saying, "Before I had sat with you so as to advise you." It's as though he's sort of trying to say to Senusret, you've got to watch out. This is the kind of thing that might happen. We're going to lose our grip on the throne if we're not careful. Around the same time, there's a key move of the capital city, and remember that the 11th dynasty line and the 12th in succession to them were based in Thebes. But during this first reign of the 12th dynasty, there's a shift northwards. As you might expect, Thebes is in the south of the country. It's maybe not best placed for somebody who's trying to run the whole of Egypt. Moves north to a new city, which is called Amenemhat Ity-Tawy. Amenemhat takes possession of the two lands, and this came to be abbreviated as just Ity-Tawy, takes possession of the two lands. We do not know where Ity-Tawy was. It's never been identified archaeologically, not with any certainty anyway. But it would make sense for it to have moved north. Another thing to bear in mind, of course, is that on and off throughout Egyptian history, it is Memphis at the balance of the two lands at the point at which the river Nile splits into the branches of the Nile Delta, strategically a very good place to be. And that is the site of the capital for most of Egyptian history. It seems that Ity-Tawy is something different. It's not Memphis. Otherwise, they would have just said, we now live at Memphis. But most probably, it's on the way from Thebes to Memphis. It is possibly somewhere in the region of Lisht. And Lisht is the red pin up towards the top right of the map here in the Nile Valley. And it is here that both Amenemhat I and his son and successor and possible co-regent Senusret I were buried within pyramid complexes. So that seems to be a sort of key indicator of where the capital was. As I say, it just hasn't been attested, just hasn't been discovered archaeologically. But as you'll see, Lisht is not a million miles away from the Fayum region, and given the attention given to the Fayum by the Middle Kingdom kings from Amenemhat I onwards, it is very reasonable to think that Ity-Tawy is also in this area. By the way, the pins in the map here, as I mentioned, the one at the top right in red is Lisht, burial place of the first couple of rulers of the line. The other two red pins, which are in the center, the one that's slightly to the right is at Lahun, which is where Senusret II was buried. The one slightly to the left of that, following the line of this green area, either side of the canal, the channel that connects the Nile Valley to the Fayum. This is the pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara. These pyramid sites almost kind of trace a journey, if you like, from Lisht into the Fayum, which is kind of what's going on in the Middle Kingdom. And as I say, there is increasing attention given to this region, culminating in the reign of Amenemhat III. The yellow pins, incidentally, right at the very top, bit difficult to see actually, just slightly to the right of where new capital Ity-Tawy is written, is a site of Khasra Saga, which is a probable Middle Kingdom temple, probably on the caravan route, a trade route out into the desert. Sort of bottom left is Medina Mahdi, site of a chapel of Renenutet of Amenemhat III and IV. Then right in the heart of the Fayum, that's the location of the modern capital city of the region, Medinet El Fayum, which is in the same place as the ancient capital Shedet. Had various names: Shedet, Crocodilopolis, Arsinoe, Keman Faris. We'll see a little bit more about that later. The other one is at the site of Biahmu, which we will also be looking at a little bit later. So Ity-Tawy is somewhere around here. We should probably go and have a look for it at some point. So yes, this also, it's possibly the troubles of the first intermediate period, possibly that lead Amenemhat and co to move northwards as well. The Fayum is conspicuously in the region of Heracleopolis, where the 10th dynasty kings were based, and one wonders if Amenemhat wasn't continuing to suffer a little bit of unrest in that region, decided to quash it by moving his own capital city up there, perhaps giving him a better chance of keeping an eye on any potential rivals for his throne. There's also the possibility that the environment or the climate may have had an impact on what's going on during this period. It seems to have been a period of declining flood levels, and one possible reason for the collapse of the Old Kingdom is a series of failed Nile floods, or troublesome floods, probably too low, which may have resulted in poor harvests and eventually even possibly famine. There's a certain amount of evidence for that. You may know those very famous scenes from the Unas Causeway at Saqqara, showing emaciated figures who are possibly suffering from hunger, possibly an indicator of famine. This had the effect, these low Niles, of lowering the level of the lake in the Fayum. The lake, by the way, in modern times is much smaller than it was in ancient times. Essentially, the Fayum is a great depression. a natural depression in the landscape, and there is a gap in the mountains to the west of the Nile Valley. Water flows from the Nile through a channel, through this gap in the mountains and into this depression. And the lake, Birkit Karun today, Lake Moeris in ancient times, more ancient times, is where that water eventually ends up. And when there was a series of low floods, the level of the lake decreased, and what that did was it freed up land that had previously been underwater, under the waters of the lake, suddenly became accessible for farming and construction. So that is part of the reason why the Fayum suddenly becomes an area of interest to the Middle Kingdom kings. They're perhaps reacting against the environmental and economic problems of the end of the Old Kingdom and the First Intermediate Period, and then taking advantage of this by building in this very fertile region. And they capitalized on this in a very particular way. Even in good times, it seems that the supply of water to the Fayum was irregular at best, even in times when the flood was allowed for the Nile Valley agricultural land to be more productive. It was difficult to control the supply of water into the Fayum. This prompted the 12th Dynasty kings to cut a canal, so to sort of make use of what had been a natural stream of water, channel of water running into the Fayum, to regularize it, enlarge it, increase the flow, and to create locks or something like that at the Nile Valley end and then the Fayum end as well, that would allow for the water to be regulated. And again, this is all a part of this effort to ensure greater and more reliable agricultural production in the area. And of course, again, this leads to construction of settlements and also major monuments as well. The lake, by the way, which is where the water eventually drains to, was simply referred to by the ancient Egyptians as the lake. And this is before it came to be known as Moeris in later times. And so the ancient Egyptian for the lake, and by extension for the region, is Par-I'im. Par is the definite article, the, and I'im is lake. And you see the hieroglyphs here. Oh, sorry, it's a very blurry set of hieroglyphic signs here. But so Par-I'im is the name, and it's from this that we eventually get the Coptic Piom, and from that eventually the modern word Fayum. So that word Fayum derives from the ancient phrase just meaning the lake. The canal, by the way, that connects the Nile Valley to the Fayum these days is known as the Bahr Yusuf. The canal of Yusuf, although Bahr actually means sea, rather than river or anything like that. This is due to an Arab myth, a much later myth connecting this channel to Joseph of the Bible and indeed of the Quran. But it is the same channel that was originally a natural branch of the river and eventually a Middle Kingdom and later canal. So, so moving on through our list of Middle Kingdom kings, Amenemhat I was eventually succeeded by his son and successor, Kepakar Ra Senusret I, who we see in this extremely fine relief. It's now in the Egyptian Museum. I haven't got a photograph of it here, but some of you may be familiar with the so-called White Chapel, which is in the open air museum at Karnak. That was also built by this king Senusret I, and it's one of the very finest examples of relief carving to have survived from ancient Egypt, a sign that this really was a great high point in art, sculpture, of any period in Egyptian history. And he also, as we've seen, was buried at Lisht, possibly next door to the capital somewhere. Both these two kings, Amenemhat I and Senusret I, added to a pre-existing temple of Sobek at Shedet or Shedet. The Fayum region, being a watery sort of landscape with the lake, etc., came to be associated with crocodiles. There were clearly crocodiles around in the region, and for that reason, the Egyptians' crocodile god, Sobek, came to be the dominant deity in the region. And the major temple in the capital city, Shedet, was a temple of Sobek, an absolutely enormous temple, as we will see. And indeed, most of the other sites in this area, most of the other temple sites are dedicated to various different forms of Sobek. And that was the case from before the Middle Kingdom, and it continued to be the case right down into Ptolemaic and Roman times. When you see names of sites, like a good example is Soknapaiu Nessos, which is sometimes known as Dime Sebah. As I mentioned, Dime Sebah means the road of the lions, but the Soknapaiu part is a sort of later kind of corrupted form of the Egyptian Sobek as the great god. So that sort of Sok is, or Sok or Suk, is how the Greeks eventually came to be saying, well, in Ptolemaic times, Egyptians came to be saying that word Sobek. So he's the dominant god, and crocodile imagery, eventually mummified crocodiles, come to be very important in the region. There is supposed to have been a royal residence somewhere in the Fayum area. Again, it hasn't been identified, not clear whether there's any connection with Ity-Tawy or not. But in any case, clearly from the very beginning of the Middle Kingdom, we have a strong connection here with the palace, with the institution of the king, and with the cult of Sobek. Senusret I is succeeded by Nubkau-Ra Amenemhat II, who we see here in the form of a very fine sphinx, now in the Louvre. He moved the site of the royal cemetery slightly north to Dahshur, which is the southernmost extent of the Old Kingdom Memphite cemeteries. You probably know that during the Old Kingdom, when pyramids are first being built, the cemetery shifts a little bit. So the very first pyramid at the beginning of the Third Dynasty is built by Nekhri Djoser. Then the Fourth Dynasty, the royal necropolis moves northwards to Giza, quite possibly because the pyramids could be seen from Heliopolis there, and that reflects the increasing importance of the sun cult. There's then a brief move to Abu Roash, even further north, then back to Giza. Then we move slightly south to Abu Sir, then back to Saqqara. But Dahshur had been a royal cemetery site right at the beginning of the Fourth Dynasty under Sneferu, and it remained an important cemetery site throughout the Old Kingdom, into the Middle Kingdom, and beyond as well. But this is the point at which the first of the Middle Kingdom kings builds a pyramid tomb at Dahshur, so sort of reconnecting, if you like, with the Memphite cemeteries. That pyramid is very badly ruined, and it's not really been very well investigated. But it has the appearance of a sort of mound of white limestone chippings now. Middle Kingdom kings, as we'll see, very, very keen on bright white limestone. And so for that reason, it tends to be called the White Pyramid. And this is Dahshur. Incidentally, this is oriented with north. The northerly direction is off to the right of the map here. I've just highlighted in and amongst the various monuments at the site the three Middle Kingdom pyramids. So the one in the middle, the White Pyramid of Amenemhat II, sorry, is the first of these. As we'll see, there's then a move southwards again into the Fayum, Lahun, and then the last two of the sort of great kings, if you like, of the 12th Dynasty, both build here. Senusret III and Amenemhat III, whose pyramid is known as the Black Pyramid because of its mud brick, which has a very dark brown, almost black appearance. This is Khar-Khepera, Senusret II. Well, it's not absolutely certainly Senusret II, but often thought to be him. A very fine piece of wooden sculpture now in the Metropolitan Museum. Again, son, possibly co-regent, successor to Amenemhat II. There's a spare stroke there. I'm sorry, Amenemhat II it should be. And he built his pyramid at Lahun, which is the first of the sites we're going to be looking at here in the Fayum. So as you can see, it's here at the sort of entrance, if you like, at the Fayum, the point at which this channel branches off the main part of the Nile, takes a westwards, makes a kind of westwards movement towards the Fayum depression, which shows up, of course, as this very large area of cultivated land with the lake at the sort of north and west there. So Lahun is right here on the canal. You can see that quite well in this zoomed in satellite image. That's the extent of the cultivated land. The canal is just sort of slightly off to the south here, and the pin is right on top of the pyramid of Lahun. You might think this is a slightly odd way of showing the map, but the reason I've done this is because the site extends off to the east of the pyramid. So if I overlay a map from Ptolemaic, I couldn't quite get these two to line up here. This is a modern Google Earth satellite image, and it's the plan from Ptolemaic. The line of the cultivation, I suspect, is probably just slightly changed, but you get a sense of where the pyramid is, in particular in relation to the town of Kahun, which is off to the east at the edge of the cultivation. Actually, the cultivation slightly eats into this. This is one of the most important and best preserved town sites from ancient Egypt. It's contemporary with the pyramid, 12th Dynasty. Very well preserved houses with lots of goodies in them, excavated by Petrie towards the end of the 19th century. It's one of probably the single best source of evidence for kind of daily life activities, particularly in this period. So very important place. But I'm just going to focus for now on this pyramid. Pyramids of this period were mostly constructed of a mud brick core with a limestone outer casing. So when they were finished, they would have had the appearance of solid stone pyramids, just like their Old Kingdom counterparts. But the ancients were making use of the more readily available mud brick for the innermost parts. In fact, at Lahun, the builders made use actually of a natural sort of hillock, a little kind of area of raised ground. It is quite lumpy bumpy, the landscape around here. So they must have decided that the Fayum was becoming significant enough. Perhaps transport along the canal into the Fayum meant that building a pyramid along that route was a great idea. It meant that the King's Pyramid could be seen by lots of traffic going by, perhaps. Also provided, of course, easy access for construction and transport of materials, that kind of thing. But they also, as I say, make use of this sort of natural lump. So the lower parts of this pyramid are in fact a natural rocky lump that's then built up with mud brick and eventually cased in limestone. The base of the pyramid is sort of leveled to create a kind of square flat platform around the sides of this little hillock. And that's partly cut into a series of rectangular shapes, mastabas along the northern side, which you can probably see there. And then there is the pyramid of a queen at the northeastern corner of the pyramid base. And that's where we're standing here in this image at the northeastern corner. So those mastabas and the pyramid the pyramid's actually just sort of slightly behind our right shoulder as we look towards the pyramid here, and the mastabas off to the right. This is the pyramid. You can perhaps just see some of the stone of this natural little hillock peeping out from the debris around the pyramid base at the left, and then of course the upper parts formed of mud brick. It is, aside from being sited in a new spot for a royal tomb, there's a number of innovations in terms of the pyramid's interior design. This is the first time that we get the pyramid entrance to the south. They are generally, or they were always in the north up until this point. We don't quite know why there was a change, but most probably it was to do with throwing robbers off the scent. That's our best guess. As you can see, the entrance passageway into the burial compartments is fairly straightforward, but then there's a strange corridor sort of surrounding the burial chamber on three sides. You sort of depart, if you want to take this route, from the burial chamber, and then takes you around almost in a circle and kind of back on yourself. This may be the beginnings of the sort of elaborate corridors we see in later pyramids, which again we think are probably to do with throwing robbers off the scent. You get a sense of these mastabas, by the way, in the Queen's Pyramid at the top here in this this drawing. I haven't labelled it, but by the way, this is from Mark Lehner's Complete Pyramids, but brilliantly useful book. This is the interior. I was at the pyramid a week or so ago, and unfortunately, there's been a collapse, rather frighteningly, in the internal chambers, which means that you can't visit at the moment. But I did get a chance to do that in recent years, and some of you, I think, I can see Linda in the chat there. I think Linda and possibly others. Amy, were you with us? I think anyway. Some of you, I expect, will have been in and will be familiar with this. Nicely cut, rock cut entrance passageway here. This is one of the sort of early stages in the corridor. There then comes a point where the rock cut corridor is lined in this incredible fine, bright white, almost kind of chalky white limestone blocks, incredibly well fitted together. I was grateful for the Ghaffir here posing, looking splendid just ahead of me. More bright white limestone en route to the burial chamber itself, which is cased in granite pieces, beautifully cut granite pieces. You can see these ceiling blocks, curving ceiling blocks, cut to create this this curving sort of barrel vaulted ceiling. And the pieces are, the detail is absolutely lovely, and the sarcophagus, as you can see here at the end, is also an incredibly finely cut and polished chunk of granite. Really fantastic inside. So it's a great shame that it's not possible to enter at the moment, but I hope it will become possible at some point. The first in modern times to enter that burial chamber was, no surprises perhaps, Flinders Petrie. By the way, we'll deal with this a little bit later, but you probably know Petrie, of course, was the first to do really serious and thorough archaeological work at so many places in Egypt. In a lot of those places, of course, subsequently more thorough, more modern, more scientific work has been done, but in lots of places, Petrie's work is still almost unsurpassed, and it's impossible in almost all cases not to refer back to what he did, because he covered so much ground so quickly, and the Fayum is no exception. So at a number of places, including Lahun, Hawara, Medinet El Fayum, Gurob, various other places in the region, we still need to refer back to Petrie's excavation reports. And he was the first in, as I say, in modern times to enter the burial chamber of the pyramid of Senusret II, and discovered this, I don't have a photograph of it, only Petrie's line drawing, but this lovely offering table inscribed for the king, and this uraeus. I just came across the other day a colour photo of the uraeus, which is now in the Egyptian Museum, so I've just overlaid that onto Petrie's black and white photo, so you get a sense of the glorious colours of that uraeus cobra. You probably know I've become a bit obsessed with countering the argument that no mummified remains were ever found inside pyramids. So I just to re-emphasize, you probably already heard me wittering on about this, but the human remains were found inside this pyramid, and we assume that they probably were the remains of Senusret himself, albeit in ransacked kind of state. So the names of the kings of the 12th dynasty go Amenemhat, Senusret, and then Senusret, Amenemhat. So Senusret II, succeeded by Senusret III, Khepera, Senusret III, son and successor of Senusret II. He returns the royal cemetery to Dahshur, but also built a rock-cut tomb, looking rather like a sort of proto Valley of the Kings long corridor type tomb at Abydos. We it's not clear, not entirely clear, whether his Dahshur pyramid or the rock-cut tomb at Abydos were the actual tomb, but it seems more likely, given the nature of Abydos as the sort of cemetery par excellence, a place of pilgrimage, the cult center of funerary gods like Osiris, Anubis, Wet-Waut, that's a cenotaph, in which case he was buried at Dahshur, as far as we can tell. Anyway, he appears in the form of this lovely sphinx, which is also in the Metropolitan Museum here. So it's his pyramid is the one that's to the sort of north and northeastern corner. That's bottom right in on the map here. So when you're leaving the site, if you're next there and you're wondering where it is, when you're leaving the site via the road to go heading back towards the Nile Valley, it's a sort of not terribly significant looking mound off to the left in a military area, which makes it very difficult to visit, but you can see it from the road anyway. I did look for my photos, but they're all terrible. You don't really see anything. And Senusret III was succeeded by Amenemhat I Amenemhat III, his son, and he was also the builder of tombs in two different places, both of them pyramids. One of them at Dahshur, we've already mentioned that this is the Black Pyramid because of its sort of dark appearance, thanks to the mud bricks. The other one at Hawara in the Faiyum. And we see him here also in the form of a sphinx, one of these very unusual sphinxes, lion's body, human face, but also kind of lion's mane and lion's ears. This is one of 7 sphinxes like this discovered at Tanis, which have come to be known as Hyksos sphinxes because they were eventually inscribed by Hyksos kings, but we think that they were originally cut for Amenemhat. They were reinscribed also much later. If you're trying to read that cartouche in between the pores and wondering what I'm talking about, it is indeed the cartouche of Susenes I of the 21st Dynasty, who most probably did that carving at Tanis, although the Sphinx was almost certainly originally set up somewhere else. Amenemhat III, as I mentioned, is the great builder in the Fayum, probably the greatest king of this line. He's remembered as Lamares by Manetho, which seems to have been a corruption of his coronation name, Amenemhat Ra. He is probably the king who in later times was remembered as Moeris. Moeris is a Greek word which seems to derive from the Egyptian mer-wer, meaning the Great Sea. And the Great Sea is a name given by the Egyptians to the lake of Fayum. So that name derives from the earlier Egyptian Great Lake, and it also came to be used by much later sort of Greek historians and geographers as the name for the king who was the kind of builder of the lake, if you like, or probably the builder of the canal, or the great builder in the Fayum. We don't know this for sure, but it tends to be thought that the Moeris of the much later Greek tradition was probably Amenemhat III, he being the great builder of the region. So he built a pyramid, as we'll see at Hawara. He was also probably, as we'll see, the builder, therefore, of the labyrinth. He built the colossi at Biahmu. He enlarged the temple of Sobek at Shedet. In Medinet El Fayum, the capital city. He also dedicated a chapel to Sobek's consort Renenutet, the serpent goddess, at Medinet Mahdi. And this is a statue of the king looking appropriately miserable. I haven't got really much time to talk about kings looking miserable in the Middle Kingdom, but they do look very distinctively miserable, as you probably already noticed. This is now in the Luxor Museum. It comes from Karnak originally, slightly smaller than life-size statue here. So let's go to Hawara. This is the second of those pyramid sites along the line of the Bahr Yusuf, the canal connecting the Nile Valley with the Fayum region. Those red pins in this map, incidentally, are there are points where there still remains of the Temple of Sobek in Shedet, and if you can just about see, there's a sort of mass of grey in the middle of all the green there. That's the built-up area of the modern city of Medinet El Fayum. So Hawara is at the opposite end of the canal from Lahun, following this sort of example of Senusret II, right at the entranceway, and not very far away from the city of Shedet itself. This is the site. So the mass of mud brick, approximately sort of square mass of mud brick you see at the top, is what the pyramid itself looks like in this satellite image. That canal snaking across the site cuts right the way through the archaeology. Goodness knows who thought it was a good idea to site the canal here, cutting right the way through the middle of Amenemhat III's funerary complex. But whoever it was did this in the first half of the 19th century sometime. We're not entirely clear when. But sometime before, I think it's 1837, is the first mention in the archaeology and the archaeological literature. But it certainly wasn't there at the beginning of the 19th century when the Napoleonic expedition visited. So it's part of Muhammad Ali's great modernization of the country. Actually, it's worth looking at a sort of timeline of investigations, because this has something of a bearing on our developing understanding of the site. So, as with so many archaeological sites in Egypt, the site was visited by the Napoleonic expedition. The work of surveyors, one of them was Caristi. I can't remember the name of the other one. I'm sorry. Their work was published eventually in the Description de l'Égypte. It was revisited, as again so many places were, by the first great British Egyptologist, John Gardner Wilkinson, and published in his guide to Thebes and surrounds, which is actually a sort of guide to the whole of Egypt. 1837 is the first point at which we get any record of the canal. This is part of the survey of Weiss and Perring, who were surveying pyramid sites. Theirs was the most thorough and comprehensive survey of pyramids to this point. Remains very important. The Lepsius expedition of the 1840s visited. Their work is incredibly important because, as we'll see, they capture remains on the surface to the south of the pyramid of Hawara, which in subsequent years in the 19th century came to disappear. That is quite important as well. In actual fact, those remains are, although they're built over the funerary complex of Amenemhat III, they are in fact part of a much later village. Lepsius didn't realize this. He thought that mud brick was part of the labyrinth, but he got that wrong, as we'll see. Vasali, the Italian archaeologist who did a lot of his work on behalf of Auguste Mariette, the head of the Antiquity Service, founder of the Antiquity Service in Egypt, excavated in 1862. That work is published in the journal Recueil de Travaux. The Lepsius expedition left, as they did more or less everywhere they went, left fantastic drawings, and we get a sense of, again, of this horrendous canal cutting right through the site, but also the approximate size and shape, rectangular shape of the area of the labyrinth to the south of the pyramid here. So as you can see, the remains of that complex are now on both sides of this wretched canal, which clearly must have destroyed a lot of whatever was left of it beneath the surface. Then, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, we get two phases of excavation by the great Flinders Petrie. The first in 1888 to 89, when he excavated and surveyed the site. This is when he entered the pyramid for the first time, did a bit of work in the labyrinth area, and also excavated the Roman cemeteries, which are off to the north and east It's here that he discovered the first of what came to be known as the Fayum portraits, these beguiling portraits of Roman residents of the area, very realistic looking portraits. They come to be known as Fayum portraits because they were found here. They are also eventually came to be found in other places as well, as far south as Luxor and quite further afield, but originally found in great concentrations here, hence Fayum portraits. He had another go, Petrie, at the labyrinth in 1911, and this is the point at which he found the most spectacular sculptures that he would find in the area. But otherwise, he wasn't really, as we'll see, able to add an enormous amount to what we know about the buildings to the south of the pyramid. This is the pyramid itself. This is another of these. Again, sorry, it's not labelled. This is from Mark Lehner's complete pyramids. The internal compartments are not as complex as they would be in other later pyramids, and they are indeed not as complex as in Amenemhat's other pyramid at Dahshur. But nonetheless, as you can see, we've got an entrance passageway. Again, it's in the south, not in the north, following the Lahun example. This proceeds sort of straight downwards into the ground. There's then a continuation which leads nowhere, a kind of blind passage, quite possibly a device to deceive robbers. The true route to the burial chamber proceeds at right angles to the entrance passageway. There's then two further right angle turns to the left. Those junctions are blocked with portcullises. You then enter the burial chamber, which itself is of a very unusual design. This is the entrance to the pyramid as it is now. It was waterlogged in Petrie's time, and he describes sort of grubbing around in the water inside the burial chamber. Since Petrie's time, the internal compartments have been completely flooded. So if you've been to the site, you'll know that you can sort of walk a few paces in through the door here before you hit the water, and the passageway is not only full of water, but it's completely choked up with debris now as well. So there's really very little to see beyond, I don't know, 5 or 10 meters or so into this passageway. This is what Petrie had to say about it. I carefully cleared out all the chips and stuff from the sarcophagi. This is inside the burial chamber. There were two sarcophagi, one of the king and one for his daughter Neferuptar, who it seems, in fact, was probably eventually buried in her own pyramid, which is just nearby, discovered in the middle of the 20th century by an Egyptian mission. Groping under the water, he says, I found some bits of bones, much charcoal, showing the coffins have been burnt inside. Also grains of burnt diorite and granite, which were probably parts of inlaying of hard stones in the sarcophagi. We found a beard of lapis lazuli for inlaying among the rubbish in the chamber. The chamber itself is, as I mentioned, is of this ingenious sand hydraulics design, where all of the burial chamber is cut of a single piece of stone, except the ceiling slabs. Those are also made of very large pieces of hard stone, the last of which is lowered into position by an ingenious sort of system of props and chimneys and sand. Some blockings are removed. The sand flows out of these so-called chimneys into little chambers at the side of the burial chamber. The props then lower down into the chimneys, bringing the final roofing block down. And this is exactly what we see elsewhere. And this is a good example of this is the pyramid discovered in 2017 of a daughter of Amenemhat I of the 13th Dynasty. Just gives you a sense. This, as you can see, burial chamber turned out to be ransacked. But everything you're looking at here, all the floor and the four walls, as it were, all cut from a single piece of hard stone of granite, which was clearly a device to prevent robbers from getting in, and that was employed, I think, for the first time in the pyramid at Hawara. So, what of the labyrinth itself? We've mentioned it several times already. It was one of the of the places which was of greatest interest to archaeologists working in Egypt from the time of the early 19th century onwards. The reason being that it was one of the sort of standout monuments for ancient writers, ancient visitors from mostly from the Greek world, coming to Egypt and describing the wonderful things they saw. They went to places like Alexandria, which was a very great city, probably the second greatest city in the ancient Mediterranean world after Rome. More modern visitors found that there was almost nothing left of Alexandria. They visited Memphis, which was the great capital city immediately prior to Alexandria, and they found very little of that. They mentioned the pyramids. Of course, we know very well that the pyramids have survived. But a lot of them talk about this fantastic labyrinth as well. And as we'll see, they describe it as being even more fantastic than the pyramids. So naturally, visitors to Egypt were very keen to find this so-called labyrinth and to identify it. The main sources, the main writers writing about this labyrinth were Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, and Pliny. They were not all writing at the same time, and that's important too, because in between the first and last of these, it seems the labyrinth was most probably destroyed. So Herodotus saw it when it was possibly still in quite good nick. By the time Pliny the Elder was writing, in the first century of the current era, first century AD, it seems it was mostly gone. We're not exactly sure how, why, or when, but it seems it had gone by that point. So Herodotus says, I'm sorry, there's lots of text now. They made a labyrinth a little way beyond the lake, Moeris, and near the place called the City of Crocodiles. That's Crocodilopolis, which had previously been Shedet, modern Medinet El Fayum. I have myself seen it, and indeed no words can tell its wonders. Were all that Greeks have builded and wrought added together, the whole would be seen to be a matter of less labour and cost than was this labyrinth. Though the pyramids were greater than words can tell, and each one of them a match for many great monuments built by Greeks, this maze surpasses even the pyramids. So it's in the region of Crocodilopolis, Medinet El Fayum. The first thing, of course, that in modern times, travellers and archaeologists wanted to establish is exactly where it was. So, of course, this reference to Crocodilopolis and Lake Moeris was a key indicator of approximately where it would be. Herodotus goes on to describe it as having 12 roofed courts, doors over against each other, 6 face the north, 6 to the south, in 2 continuous lines, all within one outer wall. There are also double sets of chambers, 3,000 altogether, 1,500 above and the same number underground. We ourselves viewed those that are above ground and speak of what we have seen. Of the underground chambers, we were only told the Egyptian wardens would by no means show them, these being, they said, the burial vaults of the kings who first built this labyrinth and of the sacred crocodiles. Thus we can only speak from hearsay of the lower chambers. The upper we saw for ourselves, and they are creations greater than human. The outlets of the chambers and the mazy passages hither thither through the courts were an unending marvel to us as we passed from court to apartment and from apartment to colonnade, from colonnades again to more chambers, then into yet more courts. Over all this is a roof made of stone like the walls. The walls are covered with carven figures, and every court is set round with pillars of white stone most exactly fitted together. Well, at this site, a number of sculptures matching the carven figures of Herodotus' description were found. This is possibly the finest, discovered by Petrie in his second phase of excavations. It's a little sort of shrine, quite unusual in its design, with 2 figures of kings, Amenemhat III himself and his successor Amenemhat IV. The 2 of them crop up together elsewhere as well, for example, in that chapel of Reconstructing at Medinet Mahdi. That line, white stone most exactly fitted together, of course, reminds us of what we've already seen in the pyramid of Lahun. I took the photograph on the right. It's actually close to the entranceway to the burial compartments at Lahun, precisely because my eye was caught by this fine white limestone pieces closely fitted together. And we see that also elsewhere. This is the interior of that rock cut tomb of Senusret III at Abydos, where again fantastic bright white limestone. The joins almost invisible. We see it also in the staircase entranceway to that pyramid of a daughter of Amenemhat I at Dahshur, and even in the interior of Amenemhat III's own other pyramid, the Black Pyramid at Dahshur. On the left-hand side, you can see some of the internal compartments here, very bright white stone. This is very typically 12th Dynasty, so it's no surprise if we are thinking that the labyrinth was indeed at Hawara, that Herodotus would come across something like this. He also says, hard by the corner where the labyrinth ends there stands a pyramid 40 fathoms high, whereon great figures are carved. A passage has been made into this underground. So again, of course, this corresponds very much to the pyramid at the site. Altogether, it looks very much like Hawara is indeed the spot Herodotus visited where this labyrinth was to be found. Writing considerably later was Diodorus Siculus, writing sometime between 1630 BCE, so that's a few centuries after Herodotus. He tells us, it remains for us to speak of the deification of crocodiles. Crocodiles again, important. A subject regarding which most men are entirely at a loss to explain how, when these beasts eat the flesh of men, it ever became the law to honour like the gods creatures of the most revolting habits. Another account is given of these beasts. For some say that one of the early kings, whose name was Minas, being pursued by his own dogs, came in his flight to the lake of Moeris, as it is called, where, strange as it may seem, a crocodile took him on his back and carried him to the other side. Wishing to show his gratitude to the beast for saving him, he founded a city near the place and named it the City of the Crocodiles, Crocodilopolis. And he commanded the natives of the region to worship these animals as gods, and dedicated the lake to them for their own sustenance. And in that place he also constructed his own tomb, erecting a pyramid with 4 sides, and built the labyrinth, which is admired by many. So this is one of these ways in which Amenemhat III appears to have been sort of almost identified as the kind of founder, if you like, of the cult of Sobek. He wasn't, but probably a builder of the great sort of iteration of the Sobek temple in Crocodilopolis. Strabo, the great geographer, writing a little bit later than Diodorus Siculus, says the lake of Moeris, this nome has the labyrinth near the first entrance to the canal, and on proceeding thence about 30 or 40 stadia one comes to a flat trapezium shaped place which has a village and also a great palace composed of many palaces, as many in number as there were gnomes in ancient times. So again, Strabo orients us in the region of Lake Moeris in the Fayum, a little way along from the point at which the canal departs from the main part of the river, exactly in the spot that we find Hawara. But this is the number of courts surrounded by colonnades, continuous with one another, all in a single row and along one wall, the structure being, as it were, a long wall with the courts in front of it. And the roads leading into them are exactly opposite the wall. In front of the entrances are crypts, as it were, which are long and numerous and have winding passages communicating with one another, so that no stranger can find his way either into any court or out of it without a guide. What fun. The marvellous thing is that the roof of each of the chambers consists of a single stone, and that the breadths of the crypts are likewise roofed with single slabs of surpassing size, with no intermixture anywhere of timber or of any other material. And on ascending to the roof, which is at no great height, one can see a plain of stone consisting of stones of that great size, and thence, descending out of the courts again, one can see that they lie in a row and are each supported by 27 monolithic pillars. Their walls also are composed of stones that are no smaller in size. At the end of this building, which occupies more than a stadium, is the tomb, a quadrangular pyramid, which has sides about 4 plethora in width and a height equal thereto. Imandes is the name of the man buried there. Well, is Imandes kind of corruption of Nima Ra, possibly the coronation name of Amenemhat III, which is just about visible on this fallen piece of red quartzite, which is, if you've been to the site, you'll probably have seen it. It's on the sort of banks of the canal, probably tossed out. Certainly came from the labyrinth anyway, it would seem. So this is the landscape in front of the pyramid. Obviously, this is the pyramid beyond. Again, if you've been to the site, you'll know there is a scatter of hard stones around the surface, and we can see the remains of some papyrus cluster columns here and some other chunks of hard stone, possibly columns, possibly doorways, possibly part of these carven figures of the kind that we've already seen, the sculptures of the king and his successor that Petrie found. These are found in this area to the south of the pyramid. So this is the area of the funerary complex, the temple attached to the pyramid, which is what was later believed to be the labyrinth. Petrie, as we've seen, was really the first to do serious, comprehensive, thorough digging at this site to try and establish whether the labyrinth was still there to any extent, or confirm that indeed this was the labyrinth. In the publication of his first phase of excavations, he said almost every stone has long since been broken up and removed, but the extent of the area we can measure, as marked out by the immense bed of chips of fine white limestone which lies on the south of the pyramid. Wherever we dig down, we find a bed of flat-laid sand or of beton, that's a kind of concrete, made of chips of stone rammed down, on which to lay the pavement and walls of some enormous building, and over that lie thousands of tons of fragments of the destroyed walls. On tracing these signs to their limits, it is found that they cover an area about 1,000 feet long and 800 feet broad. These mere figures will not readily signify to the mind the vast extent of construction, but when we compare it with the greatest of the other Egyptian temples, it may be somewhat realized. On that space could be erected the great hall of Karnak, that's the hypostyle hall, and all the successive temples adjoining it, and the great court and pylons of it, also the temple of Mut, and that of Khonsu, and the temple of Amenemhat III at Karnak, also the two great temples of Luxor, and still there would be room for the whole of the Ramesseum. In short, all the temples on the east of Thebes and one of the largest on the west bank might be placed together in one area of the ruins at Hawara. Here, we certainly have a site worthy of the renown which the labyrinth acquired. So I probably don't really need to say anything more about that. But if Petrie's right in establishing the total extent that the labyrinth occupied, it was absolutely enormous. When Lepsius visited this site, Petrie said, he claimed it for the labyrinth from its position, but the remains which he supposed to be those of the walls and chambers are really of a far later age, being merely the houses and tombs of the population which, in fact, destroyed the labyrinth. This is one of those invaluable drawings provided by Lepsius' expedition. You can see the pyramid in the background there, and then in the foreground, mud bricks standing to quite a height. And this is what Lepsius thought was the remains of the labyrinth, but which Petrie's excavations established through the excavation of associated materials, ceramics, etc., was in fact much later. We can, Petrie said, there only then turn lastly to the fragmentary and confused descriptions left by those who saw it before it was marvelously ravaged, as Pliny said. So in fact, as I mentioned at the beginning of this section, by the time Pliny, the last of our classical writers, was writing, the labyrinth was in fact in a rather woeful state, contrary to how it had been a few centuries earlier in the time of Herodotus. This is Petrie's first attempt to reconcile what he was able to dig up, which is basically the foundation layer of crushed up limestone and clean sand, beneath layers and layers of smashed stone, which are the remains of the smashed up labyrinth. So it's the extent, and then his sort of reconstruction based on a combination of the descriptions in Herodotus and Strabo and co. When he came back about 20 years later, he did a bit more excavation. This is when he was able to recover those stone sculptures. He wrote at that time as follows: the great shrines were probably each in a separate court. That's the statues that he'd found. The larger is so close to the axis that it was doubtless in an axial court. After allowing for the colonnade around the temple named by Diodorus, the breadth of which is probably shown by the two western walls now found, that's at the sort of left-hand end of his diagram here. The space between the shrines suggests that there were 4 on each side of the axis, or a row of 9 in all along the foot of the pyramid. This would agree fairly with the long hall of 27 columns named by Strabo, there being 3 columns between each of the entrance to the 9 courts. Each court would be 50 foot wide. So in fact, Petrie was beginning to think that even though these descriptions of Herodotus and Strabo, which talk about, you know, thousands of feet and thousands of columns and loads of rooms, might actually not have been far away from the truth. The total number of courts, therefore, would be 6 plus 6, seen by Herodotus in the public part of the temple, and the hall of 27 columns and 9 back courts, the row of peristyle courts, all backing on one wall, seen by Strabo. As I proposed before, that's in his earlier report, his report on his earlier excavations. The difference in descriptions is due to the 6 plus 6 courts seen by Herodotus having been destroyed by the time of Strabo, who only saw the inner parts remaining. So as far as Petrie was concerned, that destruction took place in between the 5th century when Herodotus was writing and the 1st century BC, or possibly into the 1st century of the current era when Strabo was writing. So this is his sketch plan from the first of his excavation seasons. Again, it's only sort of very, very sketchy, really, because of how little of the structures remained in situ. But you can see the extent of the labyrinth clearly extending either side of this new canal. This is his plan from the second of his excavation seasons. Again, very, very little for him to record, really, by way of in situ surviving walls or anything else. He's just got foundations and then a mass of jumbled up stone. But he can report the approximate position of some of the walls and then the shrines, right up against the pyramid, which the south side of which is just right at the top of the map here. There is very little trace of any restoration or addition to the labyrinth after the time of Amenemhat III. The name of Sobek-Neferu, his daughter, is clearly added in a rougher manner to the original name of the father on the granite capitals. There's no trace of any later ruler here until the Ptolemaic inscription given in plate 38. At least as late as Cleopatra I in 193 BC, the labyrinth was still in royal care and probably being restored in some degree. Soon after that, however, ruin fell upon it, and in Pliny's time, it was marvelously ravaged. So his discovery of these Ptolemaic inscriptions, as it says here, would seem to suggest that it was still visible. So perhaps at the time of Diodorus Siculus, there was still plenty to see. By Strabo's time, not so much. Just a few photos of some of the things that Petrie did find from the second of his reports, the report on his second phase of excavations. This is Labyrinth, Gerza, and Mazikuna from 1912. This is the remains of one of those shrines of Amenemhat III. Again, two individuals, just like the one we saw in the Egyptian Museum. This one not so well preserved. Sculptures of Hathor and Sobek. There's a sculpture of a king. If you look at the one that's in the center, just a torso of the king, that was still on site at least as late as 2022. I'm not sure if it's still there, but you can just about make out that torso here. The dog is heading towards it to have a look, with the pyramid in the background there. He also found fragments of crocodile sculptures, again speaking to the importance of Sobek in the region, and some of what are called these fire altars, sculptures of incense burners or something like that. They're at the top right here. Interesting sort of depiction of temple furniture, which we don't very often see, but quite distinctive. And then the inscriptions in the bottom right here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's several instances of the cartouche Nima Art Ra, the throne name of Amenemhat III, confirming all this sculpture dates to his time. More recently, so no really serious excavation work on the labyrinth has been done that I'm aware of since Petrie's time. Excavation work, that is, as we'll see, some other archaeological work has been done. But perhaps the next in more recent times, the most significant piece of work that's been done on this is a sort of library and desk based summary of ancient sources and more modern sources, review of the archaeology of Petrie and others by Eric Uphill, who wrote a book published, I haven't given the date here, but I think it was around about 2000, called Pharaoh's Gateway to Eternity. And this is the best single volume summary we've got of the evidence. And Uphill publishes a number of reconstruction drawings, isometric drawings, showing what some of the courtyards in the temple might have looked like. So this is a sort of sanctuary showing some of these shrines, including the ones that were of the kind that were recovered by Petrie in one of these sort of open courts. This is his reconstruction of the north side of the temple court, with the granite columns which were seen. I'm sorry I didn't show an image of this, but recovered by Lepsius. LD, by the way, is the standard abbreviation for Lepsius Denkmäler. Denkmäler is the German word for monuments, and that's the first word of the title of his the publication of Lepsius' great survey, Denkmäler aus Ägypten and Ethiopian. So this is Uphill's reconstruction of those columns. These, of course, are the kinds of columns that are still preserved in fragments of red granite still on the site. So if you're there, it's worth having a wander around. You can see quite clearly the shape of these columns as they would have been. And this is a sort of bird's eye view looking down on what was the labyrinth. With, as it says, more granite columns from Lepsius and the sanctuary approach, and this great sort of ceiling as well. Again, based on archaeology, but moreover on the descriptions from the classical writers. I mentioned that there has been more up-to-date work done at the site, and there seems to be a project which I don't know a great deal about, I must say. It seems to be a current project. It's a joint project, I think, of an Egyptian team and the universities of Nottingham, Trent and Leeds in the UK. And it's a sort of multi-pronged affair. But as part of this, they have done some non-invasive survey work, as you can see, in quite a broad area in and around the site, covering the labyrinth area, but a much wider area as well. They have a very interesting website, virtualhawara.com, where you'll be able to find more information. I have the sense from it that they are still in the early stages of what they're doing, and the results as we see them so far come from work undertaken in 2020. I guess the pandemic might have had an impact on what they were able to do. If anybody knows more about this, I'd be very grateful to hear all about it. But as far as I can tell, this is the sort of latest, and I hope there will be more to come. Wouldn't it be exciting to think that we might be able to update Petrie's plans? Back to Herodotus, just briefly. He also said, such is this labyrinth, yet more marvelous is the lake Moeris itself, by which it stands. That it has been dug out and made by men's hands, the lake shows for itself. For almost in the middle of it stand two pyramids, so built that 50 fathoms of each are below and 50 above the water. Atop of each is a colossal stone figure seated on a throne. Extraordinary. What is Herodotus talking about? Well, it seems he's talking about the site which we know as Biahmu now. Biahmu is a little to the north of Medinet El Fayum. We see the location here. This is a site I was hoping to visit on my recent trip to the Fayum. Unfortunately, it is in the middle of in the middle of an area that is very, very seldom visited by outsiders, an area of, as you can see, agricultural land and and villages, and we were unable, unfortunately, to get permission to go on this day. So I have still never been to the sites, but you get a sense of what's there from the satellite images. You can see the pin is in between two sort of masses of stone fragments, in the centre of which are two large masses of stone, and these are, it seems, the two pyramids in inverted commas, which Herodotus tells us were in the middle of the lake. And again, it's worth remembering that the lake, we are clear, was much bigger in ancient times than it is now. As you can see from this map, Biahmu is a long way from the extent of the lake now, but it's not impossible that it was at the edge of it, if not in the middle of the lake, in ancient times. This is the site of Biahmu as Lepsius saw it. Two pyramids, Herodotus calls them, piles of stones. You might think this is what they look like now, at least in this photograph, which was taken by Einsamer freely available via the Wikimedia Commons site. We believe that they are not pyramids, but as Herodotus said, they had statues on top of them, and given their appearance, they seem to be plinths, pedestals for colossal statues. The statues don't exist anymore, but here they are, two plinths. And given their design and the design of the area around them, and given that Herodotus reports they were in the middle of the lake, and they may well have been at the edge of it, it is very possible that they were perhaps some kind of quay or a harbour or something like that. This is Petrie's reconstruction of what one of these pedestals with the statue in position would have looked like in Amenemhat III's time. So they're a kind of very unusual, very kind of unique monument. But again, they speak to a lot of these characteristic features of the Middle Kingdom, constructed under Amenemhat III, very much part of the sort of manipulation of the landscape in and around the lake, and possibly at the point at which the canal disgorges into the lake, and possibly providing access across the lake. We know that there were caravan routes on the other side, and stone being hard stone coming down via the Widan al Faras into this region. There's lots of monumental construction. It may have been an important sort of transport route. Anyway, there's a bit of mystery around these, but very much part of this Middle Kingdom development of the area. So that's Biahmu. And lastly, we are going to return to the center of the Fayum itself. So Biahmu is just to the north of this cluster of red pins, which themselves are at the northern extent of the modern-day Medinet el Fayum, Fayum city, the capital city of the Fayum region. This spot, as we've already seen, has had several names over the years. Medinet el Fayum just means the city of Fayum in Arabic, of course. It has been known, or part of it, the important part of it in archaeological terms, has been known as Kiman Fares, in more recent times. Prior to that, it was named Antinoe by Ptolemy II, named after his sister and wife, Antinoe. Before that, it was known as Crocodile City, Crocodilopolis, to use the Greek word. And before that, the earlier ancient Egyptian name for this center was Shedet, or Shediet. This is Shedet in hieroglyphs here. That first part looks like Sedut. Should be in transliteration font. I'm sorry, that hasn't come through. This was the most, the city itself, specifically, not just the Fayum region generally, but specifically the city, was the most important cult center of the crocodile god Sobek in the whole of Egypt, hence the name Crocodilopolis. And as I mentioned earlier, Sobek, the ancient Egyptian Sobek, becomes Sukos in Greek, or suchus in Latin, and that was sometimes abbreviated to just suk, hence suknupayu, Sobek Nebpa, Necha Sobek, the Lord, the great God, something like that. The city eventually came to worship a living crocodile, Petsuchos in the Greek, meaning the son of Sobek. That's an extension of the late period and Ptolemaic idea of gods being manifest in real life living animals. So this is how you get the Apis bull being treated as a god in the temple of Ptah at Memphis, the mother of Apis, and then you get the mummification of animals: ibis birds sacred to Thoth, baboons sacred to Thoth, falcons sacred to Horus, cats of Bastet, dogs of Anubis, etc., etc. In the Fayum, it was crocodiles. You might have seen mummified crocodiles in places like Komombo. That was another center of cult center of the god Sobek, but not on the same scale as the Fayum cult center. Yes, and as it says here, the Ptolemies called the city, in fact, they called it Ptolemais Euergetes until Ptolemy II renamed it after his sister wife, Arsinoe II. Just a little digression here. You may know I have an interest in how it comes to be that we know about archaeological sites. I'm interested in the labyrinth, in that. It was at one time, it seems, the mortuary temple of Amenemhat III. It then acquires this fame in later times. It becomes to be known as a labyrinth, even though that's maybe not quite what it originally was. That's what it was in the minds of these Greek writers. It then disappears, but then it's sort of to some extent recovered. I'm very interested in this phenomenon of how we come to know about archaeological sites, the fact that they can be sort of lost and found, but then they can also come to be lost again. This was a particular preoccupation of mine when I was writing my book, Egyptologist Notebooks, which focuses on the archives of Egyptologists and expeditions like those of Napoleon's savants and Carl Richard Lepsius as well. I was interested in those because they preserve sites and monuments in Egypt in forms that they don't survive in to this day, because sites and monuments actually change very, very rapidly. And so, sites that were still surviving at the beginning of the 19th century or first half of the 19th century, that even as recently as that, but has since come to be lost, are of particular interest to me. And these might include places like this triumphal arch at Mentuhotep in Middle Egypt. This is now lost. The temple of Antiopolis, a Ptolemaic temple at Antiopolis, close to Asyut. This was washed away by the river in between the Napoleonic expedition's time and 1821 is when it finally disappeared for good. This is a lovely temple of Amenemhat III, reinscribed by Seti I and Ramesses II, which was lost in 1822. This would have been the best surviving example of a temple built and decorated by the famous Cleopatra. But sorry, a bit of the caption is missing here. It's a birth house at Armant. This was destroyed in 1861. All of these now only really exist in the records made by the Napoleonic expedition or the Lepsius expedition or the notes and drawings of other Egyptologists. When I was doing my Egyptologist's Notebooks book, something that really caught my attention was this drawing by the French soldier turned excavator Jean-Jacques Riffaut. Published this drawing in his Voyage en Égypte, en Nubie et lieux circonvoisins. And this is a section drawing and plan of the mound of Kom Medinet Fares. Medinet Fares, or Kom Fares, Kiman Fares, is the location of the ancient cult center of Sobek, of the Middle Kingdom onwards. And as you can see from this drawing, it appears to have been a very substantial tell that Riffaut had perhaps himself or others before him dug down into. And as you can see from his drawing, there's rather a lot of archaeology in there. It's not maybe as quite as scientific a drawing as we might hope for, but it's still very tantalizing. And I was kind of fascinated by this because there seems to be so little left of this now, and I've been wondering for a long time what has happened to it. Well, it turns out that Kimon Fares is now located within the city of Medinet El Fayum, Medinet El Fayum, which has grown, of course, uh, as Egypt has modernized and the population has grown. It's now a sort of district in the north and west of the city, and the pins here in the map, with the exception of the one over to the right, actually, which is nothing to do with Kimon Fares. It's the cluster over to the left. That represent what remains of the ancient cult center of Sobek. Petrie, again, back to him, was really the last to have a really thoroughly good go at establishing what was there. And he was able to establish the extent of the temple, and this is his sketch plan. Again, sadly, by his time, very little of it was left. He tells us this: the great temenos covers a large space, being overfilled up with dust and fragments of the colossus, 1,000 feet long and 750 feet wide. Now, if you remember the dimensions of the labyrinth at Hawara, it's approximately the same. And you'll remember that Petrie told us there that area would have been big enough to accommodate Karnak, Luxor, and the Ramesseum. So this temple also is enormous. The brick wall around it is about 30 feet thick and still about 40 feet high in the least worn part. Most of the site is now cultivated land belonging to Ferhat Effendi, who reclaimed it 3 or 4 years ago. Hence, research here is almost impossible now. I'm very sorry, some of the text is going to be invisible to you, isn't it? I'm sorry. Hence, research here is almost impossible. Many pieces of statues and inscriptions have been found, and much stone has been removed in course of this cultivation. So far as the still bare ground was not too deeply encumbered by rubbish, I have excavated in it, and so recovered some notion of the plan of the temple, which is what you see in the previous slide. At the pylon are some immense blocks of red granite, remains of the gateway. These were in position until about 1860, when the stone grubbers of Medinet found that there was limestone beneath them and steadily mined it out until the standing parts fell and the threshold tipped over and sunk. We know very well, of course, that particularly during the 19th century, it was recognized that mud brick was a useful fertilizer. So much of the ancient mud brick of settlements, towns, cities was removed and used as fertilizer. So we lost a lot of archaeology that way. But limestone could also be burnt, and the product of that burning also used as a fertilizer. And so that's what's happening here. This is what Petrie is describing. The area of the cult center of Sobek became farmland, and naturally, people wanting to make the best use of the land around them made use of the limestone that was there. And so it seems, even if Rifo was able to see a lot of the remains of Kimon Fares in the second half of the 19th century, not long before Petrie got there, much of the stone came to disappear. No doubt the old foundations and pieces of statues like that of the Hyksos chiefs now in Bulak lie beneath the fields of corn and cotton. But when the government has once allowed a site to be cropped, there is an end of archaeology unless a serious rent is paid for excavation. The enormous depth of the rubbish of later times deters all attempts at clearing the place. My pits in the lowest part of the mounds went down 21 feet to the primitive soil, and in the temenos, that's the temple area, the depth is about 13 feet. So long as other sites are less encumbered and uncultivated, Arsinoe will not be a promising field for early research. So in other words, not only had much of the stone already gone, but what was still there was going to be too much trouble for anybody to dig out, particularly because the land was no longer protected by the Antiquities Service. It belonged to the farmers, therefore very expensive to dig as well. And that, it seems, is probably the reason why we don't have more of the cult center of Sobek anymore. And when you go to Porter and Moss, the topographical bibliography of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic texts, reliefs, and paintings, as you can see here, the entry on Kimon Fares, which begins at the bottom of the left-hand page and continues for a few lines on the top of the right, is all there is to say about the site, which is really not very much at all. There are hundreds of pages on Giza alone. and just a tiny little footnote, which is a real shame. What else can I tell you about Akim and Fares? Well, oddly enough, it was used as the location for some of the filming in Cecil B. DeMille's film The Ten Commandments. So if you want to see what it looked like at the time that was filmed, what would that be, 1950s maybe? You can have a watch of that film. There's a bit of mud brick in the background there. I wonder if that's the remains of ancient buildings in and around the temple. This is a photo on the FayumEgypt.com website showing the state of the site in 1964. So at least then it was still unencumbered by modern buildings, maybe still possible to salvage something. But unfortunately, the situation today, half a century or so and a bit more since that photograph was taken, is much, much worse. Inevitably, urban Medinet El Fayum has developed and spread. And these pins now are the last surviving protected areas. So this is Area 1. This is the remains of a temple of Ramesses II. Area 2 is a temple of remains of a temple of Ptolemy. Area 3, the remains of what's called a small bath. This must be, I think, Ptolemaic or Roman. The Great Bath is Area 4. And what was the temple of Amenemhat III is supposed to be in this location. But when I looked in the satellite image, I couldn't see anything other than streets and gardens. Maybe those gardens are the protected archaeological area, but whereas in the other places it's still possible to see stone, there's really nothing visible here at all. So unfortunately, I think our last hope of salvaging anything of the Middle Kingdom Temple of Sobek has gone. This is what you can see of the stonework of Ramesses II at the site. The last sort of positive note, however, is that some of the more important pieces of stone, and you can see more of these distinctive red granite cluster columns here, have been moved from the site and installed about 10 years ago, I believe, in the open-air museum at the site of Komoshim, Koranis, a Roman settlement. So you can see the finest surviving pieces of the Temple of Sobek, albeit removed a few miles to the north and east outside Fayum proper. So there we go. Thanks very much for listening. I've overrun as usual. Thanks for sticking with it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was some new stuff in there for you. Let me know. So I'm going to stick around if there's anybody out there for a few minutes. If you've got questions, do pop them into the chat. I will go back through now. I can see that there are some questions. Yeah, so love to hear what you think. It's just a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to see the chat this time. I know I keep going on about this, but anyway, so Angel Great, hello, welcome back. Nice to see you again. Thanks for all your mud brick pharaonic pyramids were disassembled after the fact. Really good questions. So I think basically mud brick is it's easier to come by. You can make it more or less anywhere close to the river, or in this case, a branch of the river. It's easy to make. So in terms of logistics, it's just much easier to build in mud brick than it is in stone. Stone has the advantage of being more durable and stronger, but the calculation in the Middle Kingdom must have been, we can build a pyramid core from mud brick that is stable, strong and stable enough, and then case it in limestone, and nobody will ever know. And in fact, I think they were probably right in that, if you look at the surviving mud brick core of the pyramid, this is Amenemhat III at Hawara, but if you look at the ones at Lahun, at Dahshur as well, they've probably survived pretty much as well as some of the stone-built pyramids. If you think of some of the less solidly constructed stone pyramids, think of the pyramids at Abu Sir, for example, or Usa Kaf, Teti at Saqqara. Those look more like sort of piles of stone and sand than anything else. And the outer casing gets robbed away regardless, whatever the interior is made of. So I think that's it. It's just easier. And how many was disassembled after the fact? Not sure that. Well, yeah, good question. I suppose it's probably likely that some mud brick from pyramids like this has been removed by the Sebachin, who the farmers who were removing the mud brick for use as fertilizer. But they may well have found that it was easier to carry off mud brick from elsewhere. So if you think back to that image of Lepsius's of the mud brick walls in and around this area, in and around that you see on the slide here, in and around the area of the labyrinth, that's all gone now, and that's almost certainly because it was carried off for fertilizer. Whereas the pyramid is still there. Probably those farmers wanting to use the mud brick for fertilizer just found that it was much easier to just pick it up off the ground rather than start climbing up a pyramid and trying to get rid of it that way. I suppose it's impossible for us to say. It would be impossible for us to say if a pyramid had been completely dismantled like that. And there are kings, particularly in the Second Intermediate Period, kings and other members of the royal family who might in theory have had mud brick pyramids that were completely removed. But generally speaking, even when you think about sort of erosion, natural erosion, sebokheen, etc., it's rare that they remove everything to the extent that there's no trace. So I would think that it's not likely that we're missing anything completely, but what you never know. Another question from Angel Great is as follows. So, Doctor Who makes the name Sutek more popular than Set or Seth? People end up referring to Seti as Suteki. Would you follow suit? No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't, because although all those names Set with an H, which we would pronounce as Seth, but the Egyptians had no th sound as far as we know. So Set with or without an H should probably both be pronounced Set. And Sutek are both based on Egyptian spellings. The first of those is much more common, so I think Seti is better. And if you look at the way that the name Seti is written, I think it's better to think of it as Seti than Suteki. I would say. Do I believe in David Roll's theory that Amenemhat III is the pharaoh of Joseph and that Dahshur II is the pharaoh of the Exodus? No, I don't, I'm afraid. I don't think the evidence allows us to draw the conclusions that David does. And I like David. I think he's a brilliant storyteller and he knows a massive amount. But I think, I think the conclusions that he draws are, even if they're possible, they're only possible, and he's looking for evidence to fit a very, very specific story, the Bible narrative, that is most probably not one we can rely on. So I'm not sure I'm explaining that terribly well, but I don't think trying to prove what's in the Bible is a terribly good idea, and I think the best you could really say is that maybe that happened, maybe, but David's conclusions are much firmer, and the way that he writes and speaks, it's as though there's no doubt, and that's not right, I think. Nicholas Reeves invites you to witness him drill into KV62. Would you accept his invitation? Well, sure, I'd love to. I don't think he would invite me. He and I were pretty good friends the last time we spoke. We had lunch in the Metropolitan Museum in 2012. I think that was the last time I saw him, but that is a long time ago. Yeah, sure, I would. But I don't think it's going to happen. Do I think the bricks that made up the mud brick homes were taken from the pyramid of Amenemhat III? Probably not. I suspect that those. No, probably not. I think there's too much of that pyramid still surviving. I think if they really wanted to go to town and make use of it, then they would have taken more. Another one from Angel Great. Imagine the destroyed building of Cleopatra actually had a tomb underneath, and whoever destroyed it and crewed over the Egyptologists and hid it too. Well, I don't think there's any good reason to think that she was buried at Armant, and plenty of good reasons to think she was buried in Alexandria. And I also think that there was enough sniffing around the birthhouse at Armant before it was destroyed, that people would have found a tomb if it was there. Well, maybe not, but no, I don't think there's any good reason to think that it's Armant. So a few more comments. Leonardo, who I know, thanks for coming, Leonardo. I know you've got a particular interest in the labyrinth. Loved your thoughts on the labyrinth. Louis from Virtual Hawara will be at our event on October the 24th. Would you join us for a chat? I've got to go away to Egypt, Leo, and I'm going to be super busy. I'd love to join you if I was free, but I think I'm probably not going to be. But I know I have an email from you, I think, in my inbox, so I will check and let you know. But thanks for inviting me, and it's exciting to think that you've got the Virtual Hawara team on board, because I'd love to know more about the work. Bettina says that was so interesting. Thank you, Bettina. I had no idea there was so much in the Fayum. I had a great time in the Fayum the other week. Lovely sights. It's a lovely place. There's a lot of desert driving. I love that. It's very quiet. It's not nearly as busy as some other places. You think of the very busy sort of hotspots like Giza or Luxor. It's nothing like that. I loved it. I would really strongly recommend spending a bit of time in the Fayum. It's great. Beautiful natural landscapes and great archaeology. Astrid says, brilliant works. Thank you very much. Thank you, Astrid. Thanks so much. Intrepid Frady Cat says, I enjoy this. Thank you. Thank you too. Naomi says, is there a possibility of getting archaeologists into Medinet El Fayum due to future developments? I have a friend who works in archaeology and most of his digs are because of development. I don't think it really works like that in Egypt, unfortunately, Naomi. It's the same in the UK, isn't it? Or at least it was when I was a student of archaeology here, in that PPG 16, which we were all banged over the head with, Planning and Policy Guidance Note 16, which is the bit of paperwork that's sort of led to the situation where if Sainsbury's want to build a new supermarket, then they have to pay for the archaeology to get done. First of all, that led to a whole load of archaeological work getting done and lots of commercial archaeology being done. But I don't think it works like that, unfortunately, in Egypt. I just don't know. And I mean, there must have been. I mean, the Temple of Sobek's been built over, and unfortunately, maybe it would be possible to find out, how that happened and when that happened and why that happened and whether anybody was consulted. But certainly, I don't know about it, and I haven't been able to retrieve anything about it. And that's kind of generally the way it works, I think. But it's a good question, thanks. And I mean, maybe one day it will be possible to somehow go back and look underneath what's now roads and blocks of flats and things. Ellen says, such an interesting lecture. Thank you so much. I have to go over the video again. Got all the sources and quotes. Yeah. Folks, by the way, I you may know from lectures of mine in the past that I always try to post a kind of page of notes and guide to further reading to my website, but I've been so busy lately, I'm now behind. So I do want to do this. I managed to do it for Pyramid Myth Busting, but there's a couple of others I haven't done it for, and I'm not sure if or when I'm going to get a chance to do the same for this talk. But I do always try and, as you probably know, put in references to the things I use in my slides, which I hope will help. And if you've got specific questions, just drop me a line and I'll do my best to help. I really hope to be able to get back to doing those pages of notes, even retrospectively. But looking at my schedule at the moment, I knew I am not going to be able to do this straight away. So sorry, I'm behind with that. Emma says, what are your plans for more talks? Up-to-date info on Alexandra or Cleopatra? I'm not sure what I'd add on those, actually, Emma. So as you all know, I'm doing the Osiris next month, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Seth on in December. I have it in mind to do something on the design of Valley of the Kings tombs, design and function of tombs in the Valley of the Kings. I have it in mind to do something on Hatshepsut and Thutmose III as well, because people keep asking me to do that. You may even have asked me to do that yourself. I'm not sure. Sorry. And yeah, and actually, it's in my mind as well to maybe just ask you all, just send a message to you all, and just say, hey, look, give me your suggestions, and then we'll go from there. I haven't made any decisions beyond December. So yeah, but I think probably not Alexandra or Cleopatra, unless I can think of a way in, because I've covered both those subjects in broad terms before. I'm not sure I've got enough new stuff, but I will think about that, as always. Thank you for your suggestion. Linda says, fantastic talk. It's a fascinating area. Thank you very much, Linda. Good to have you here, as always. Zoe says, absolutely fascinating, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Zoe. Thanks for tuning in. Labyrinth must certainly have been a sight to behold. Given what is known of the site to date, do you feel it warrants a full excavation now? I think, Zoe, I had this conversation with a couple of people when we were there the other day. I have a horrible feeling that probably Petrie, you never know. I have a horrible feeling that there's just nothing left to find, and that it was smashed. I guess you could excavate every square inch and take it right down to Petrie's foundation level, and you'd probably find more. But it would be such a massive thing to do that. I do have a bit of hope for the virtual Hawara. Is it the Mahata project? Leo will tell me. And the geophysical survey. Having said that, they seem to have done the geophysical survey, and I guess if there was anything sort of revelatory, then maybe we'd have heard about it already. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but we'll see. I've got certainly hopeful that the new project is going to yield more, but I'm not that hopeful. Annette says, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Annette. Thank you for coming. Angel Grey says, one more super chat for today. Thank you for all your super chats, Angel Grey. I really appreciate it. Do you think Amenemhat and Horemheb are the same person? Changed from Horus to Aten for Akhenaten and changed back? Possibly. And that actually is something that I could cover at a certain point in the future. You obviously know there's this phenomenon of people changing their names in the Amarna period from or to Aten worshipping names and back again, and the Dutch mission to South Saqqara, or the New Kingdom necropolis at Saqqara, discovered the tomb of a man called Meri Nath, who had changed his name to Meri Aten at a certain point. It's not impossible. It's not impossible that Amenemhat and Horemheb are the same person, but the difference in name makes it difficult for us to know for sure. But thank you. That's a good thought, and I will think about taking that up in a talk in the future. Amelia says, thank you very much, Amelia. Thank you for coming. Bettina says, Leonardo, what event is that? Is it available online? Leo, please do post the details in the chat here if you've got them, and if it's public. I'm not sure if it is or not, but do feel free to do that. Amy says, which do you think came first, the Minoan labyrinth or the Egyptian one? If we're right with our Egyptian and Minoan dates, then it would be the Minoan one. And Herodotus, I think, does say at a certain point that the Egyptian one may have inspired the Cretan one. I think I didn't include that passage in the talk, but yeah, I think I'm no expert in Cretan archaeology, but I think if I have the right dates in mind, I think we'd have to think of the Egyptian one as being earlier. Naomi says, "Oh, thanks anyway, Chris. Brilliant lecture. Can't wait for the next one." Thanks. Thank you very much, Naomi. Looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Bettina says, "Just spotted Asian Egyptian materials and technology. I just got this and it's brilliant." Yes, you're totally right. Yeah, it's indispensable. I'm really very pleased to have got that. I think somebody sent me a copy of that in the lockdown, which is just brilliantly helpful. Leo says, "You're too busy, Chris." Yeah, Leo, right at the moment, I really am. And then says, "I'd love to hear more about anything to do with the Middle Kingdom." Great, that's a good tip. I'm always saying this, but I'm supposed to be writing this book, and there will be a section on the Middle Kingdom which I haven't written yet. So there may well be more, but I've really enjoyed thinking about the Middle Kingdom for this talk. So yeah, let's think about that. Leo says the underground level is still there. Oh, that would be very exciting if it was. Petrie and others riffing on what the ancient writers say does talk about kind of catacombs of Sobek, which is a reference to, I assume, a kind of animal necropolis, kind of mummified crocodile catacombs, like the animal catacombs that we get at Saqqara and Tunel Jebel and where else? Other places. If they are catacombs of that kind, then they are going to be later than the labyrinth. Maybe the labyrinth was extended. Sorry, the mortuary temple of Amenemhat III was extended, and that resulted in there being more. In which case, could there be more underneath the foundations of the Middle Kingdom? Middle Kingdom temple, possibly. I mean, that's exactly the situation you get at North Saqqara, where Brian Emery in the 1960s is looking for the tomb of Imhotep, finds a bunch of Third Dynasty mastabas, excavates down into one of these mastabas in the hope of finding the burial chamber, and breaks into the actually much later catacombs, which were underneath the Third Dynasty mastabas in a network of tunnels that you could very well describe as labyrinthine. That's an exciting thought. Yeah, possibly. Makes you wonder if I mean, they'd be waterlogged anyway. I wonder if the canal builders would have hit those if they were in that part. Maybe they, by sheer good or bad luck, missed the catacombs in digging the canal. Who knows? Anyway, it'd be great if they found them. Emma says, "How is the Grand Egyptian Museum?" Oh yes, folks, I've just been to the into the entrance hall of the Grand Egyptian Museum. My first visit. I've been to the conservation labs about 1 million times over the years. For TV and other purposes, but I'd never been into the museum building itself until the other day. And you probably know that it's possible to enter the entrance hall where the colossal statue of Ramses II, which used to be in front of the railway station in what was then called Ramses Square after the statue. I don't know if it's still called that now because the statue's not there. That colossal statue, and then there's this grand staircase on which they've put a load of big stone sculptures. And I spent a couple of hours slowly going around looking at all those things. I mean, it's the entrance hall is absolutely massive. The sculptures are all, of course, fantastic pieces, very interesting things. Loads of trip hazards, to be quite honest. It's a little bit odd navigating your way up and down stairs while you're looking at objects. I nearly fell over a few times, and we were forewarned about this by our guide Mentuhotep II beforehand as well. I didn't fall over, but I suspect people will. The lighting is also a bit tricky at times. It's quite sort of strong, high contrasty, which makes it a bit difficult to take photos, I found. But the pieces are amazing, and the space is, I mean, it's absolutely massive. Very, it's a wow. It took me 2 hours to walk, by the way, to walk up and down the staircase. So that goodness only knows. People will need a week. I'm not exaggerating, and people will need a week to feel as though they have done the museum properly, I'm sure. Yeah. Hello, Jamie. Sorry I'm late, Chris. Weird day here. I'm sorry to hear that, Jamie. But thanks for joining. And of course, you can always catch up afterwards if you need to. Leo has posted the dates of the Labyrinth event that he's running. Leo, if there's something if there's a link or something that I can post, if you send it over to me, I'll do my best to post that. I'm as I say, I'm absolutely mad busy at the moment, and I'm also off to Egypt on Monday. But if I get a moment, I will share that certainly with channel members. Jab Lumax, you are very generous. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, and thanks so much for your generosity. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. I haven't said this since I finished the talk, but thanks again, everybody, for being here and for tuning in and for joining the channel. I know this is it's a new and different, maybe slightly unusual way of joining these talks, and maybe I don't know, slightly sort of weird way for you to be joining lectures, but it's still a bit of an experiment for me. It does seem to be working so far. Little YouTube technical hitches notwithstanding, but it does seem to be working for me, which is really great. And if it wasn't for your support, I wouldn't be doing this at all. I wouldn't be doing these talks. I wouldn't be getting to read up about and think about and go and visit sites relating to the Middle Kingdom and the Fayum and the Labyrinth. So yeah, thanks for making this work. Really appreciate it. And Jab, thanks. Your contribution is a massive part of that. Thanks so much. Naomi says Gem has been threatening to open for years now. Can't wait for when it's finally open when I turn 80. Yeah, I know. Golly gosh, 2015, I think it was due to open at one point, wasn't it? Angel Great says, if you go to Egypt again, please get a selfie with the New Kingdom pharaohs. Yeah, I'm not very good at selfies, but I did take one in the Gem. Maybe I'll post that in the community here for you all. And Angel Great, if you like that, great, but nobody else does, then it's the last time. Anyway, okay, I think we're at the I think we're at the end of the questions and comments and things, so I'm gonna sign off. I think been here for just over a couple of hours. Thanks again. I really enjoyed looking into this stuff, and it really worked for me to be able to go to these places, take a few photos, think about them, do a bit of reading, put everything together, talk to you guys about it, hear your comments and questions. Yeah, really great. I feel like this is how it should work. This is what it should be like. So yeah, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed it. Send me your questions after the fact if and when they occur to you. Next one is, when did I say it was? 4th of November, I think, on the Osirion. And by the time I get to doing that, I will have hopefully had a really nice, productive, long trip into the Osirion, taking loads of photos for you. So I'm looking forward to sharing those with you in a month. And in the meantime, take care, keep in touch, and I'll see you when I see you. Right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.